Hello, everyone. Welcome to another edition of FitRx. I'm your host, Dr. Greg Dennis. Today, we're going to talk about probably several different things, but specifically red light therapy. And I've been wanting to do an episode for a while on red light therapy and have even had some people specifically ask me about red light therapy. And so I think you'll enjoy this episode. But my guest actually has quite a few books out, so we may touch on a few different topics. But my guest today is Mark Sloan, and he will tell his story, I'm sure. But he, like a lot of people, had things happen in his life that then took him to just becoming a researcher and looking at data and learning about all these different things. And then he has become an author, written multiple books, one on red light therapy that we'll touch on today. He's written books on cancer, one on methylene blue, which we'll touch on. He's got another one coming out on polyunsaturated fatty acids, which we'll also touch on briefly. So excited to have him here today. So Mark, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, Greg.
Okay, well, first, just tell our listeners, if you will, how in the world you got into, authoring all these books about kind of, I guess it'd be considered alternative health type things. But, tell us, I guess, a little bit about your journey getting started, and then specifically what got you into red light therapy.
Yeah, so my journey, I guess it was catalyzed, my work into the health and research area, catalyzed by a tragedy. I think like many people, I instead of kind of feeling sorry for myself, I turned that into an opportunity. And that tragedy was the loss of my mother when I was 12 years old to cancer. And 15 or so years later, I had the questions, they started coming in, the questions that everyone, I think, thought in my family and everyone that knew us, they never really asked. And that was the big one for me that first came to mind that made me realize I need to start researching this was, did my mom die of cancer, or did she die from the treatments for cancer? Because it was pretty clear that as soon as she got chemotherapy, it was like she got hit by, a Mack truck. That's when the symptoms started. Before that, there was no evidence she was sick. So I was like, okay, what's going on here? We need to find out what's going on. Do surgery, chemotherapy, and radiotherapy work? If they do, let's keep using them. But if they're killing people faster than they would have died without any treatment at all, then we need to find like a better replacement. I want to make sure no kid has to go through what I did and this horrible trauma that I had to endure, which turned out to be a blessing in disguise, by the way, because it gave me this path and this purpose. And so I started researching. I committed to writing a book on cancer and looking at all the data from the scientific evidence that exists. We've been using surgery for thousands of years on cancer patients, radiotherapy since like 1895, shortly after the discovery of ionizing radiation and a way to manufacture it, and chemotherapy shortly after 1946. That's when they started using it on people. So what are the results? Did these things work or not? And they have been studied. And I kind of brought it all together into one book for the first time ever. It's like the most dense, the most comprehensive scientific investigation into these so-called therapies and whether or not they work. And that's why I say, if you breathe air, you got to read it, because once your doctor pronounces someone sick with the C word, with cancer, it's like your world's turned upside down and you can't really think logically. So this needs to be like investigated by anyone who cares about themselves and their health before that happens. That's why I wrote the book. It never needs to be written again. And ultimately what I discovered, which turned out to be a second book, was that not just cancer, but like all diseases, the same thing actually is happening behind the scenes. And that is a lower than normal metabolism. In other words, your body's not manufacturing ATP energy, like physical biological energy. It's not manufacturing it efficiently. And this kind of declines slowly over time. When you're a kid or a puppy, it's like they're just zipping around the room, so much energy, so much life in them. And then as life goes on, you gradually lose that energy until you literally die. You can't, your body can't maintain all of its vital functions. So metabolism, that's kind of where everything has led. And that's how I got into red light therapy, because once I finished the 2 books on cancer, I was like, okay, so metabolism is the key. What's the secret? What are some therapies that actually act on the metabolism and help the body produce energy? And so red light therapy was a shining star among them from what I've seen. And there's been over like 50,000 scientific and clinical studies on it now. And I decided I'm going to write the best book ever on the subject and bring together all the data so people can inform themselves and think for themselves and decide for themselves their own fate. If they don't want, a surgery or a toxic pill from their doctor, and they don't think that's a good idea, well, here's another option. This one's actually addressing the root cause, the thing that's slowing down your metabolism.
Interesting. So, gosh, we could have a whole episode on the things you just said. But it may have you back specifically talking about cancer in your book. But so, there's a lot of things out there. I mean, my listeners are aware of this, that obviously can make you healthy, and maybe help with metabolism. And obviously there's nutrition, and there's all these things. And so, I mean, what was it about red light therapy that made you kind of pinpoint on that?
I think when I was just looking at the research, how safe, in addition to how effective it was, like this stuff is incredibly safe. And also because it's free, when you're outside in the sun, you're getting that. So I wanted to kind of promote, what God has given us. Little do people know, everybody knows UVB from the sun is good for you in the right dose, that is. But the other part that they don't know that is probably more medicinal and beneficial is the red and near infrared radiation coming from the sun. Around 60% of the radiation emitted from the sun when you're outside at the beach or something, or playing frisbee, that is in the red and near infrared end of the spectrum. So you're getting a good dose of that when you're out in the sun. And I always tell people, get some more sun. Don't be afraid of it. As long as you're not getting burnt, it's almost pure benefit. So that is one of the reasons, because it was so safe and so effective, and also it can be free for many people, although many of us aren't blessed to live in a part of the world that has a lot of sunshine year round. So that's kind of why I got into it. It was incredibly effective and incredibly safe.
Okay. So let's get into that a little bit deeper. So first, let's just define what is red light therapy and near infrared. I mean, people think of, the red light lamps, which we'll talk about, but I mean, just kind of define, if you will, the red and near infrared light.
Yeah, so the oldest known use of red light therapy was by ancient Egyptians, who would create colored glass solariums. So if you have like a red lens on glass, it will filter out all the other wavelengths and just let in the red wavelengths, which is 600 to 700 nanometers in length. And so any radiation in that block of wavelengths, that will be as constituted red light therapy. And the therapy is basically, whether it's the sun or a light, like an incandescent bulb or a red light therapy device, or a heat lamp, like what you have for chickens sometimes. Red light therapy is basically directing that at the cells and tissues of the body with no clothes, because it's a very efficient blocker. And it turns out that light gets absorbed by enzymes in cells, and that in turn upregulates the production of energy.
Okay. So what is it about that particular wavelength of light? Is it just because that comes from the sun? I mean, what is it about that makes us healthy, that improves metabolism? Why that narrow range?
Yeah, it's a good question. I guess we don't really know for certain all of the intricacies as to why that range in particular, but it seems that that range is absorbed by an enzyme called cytochrome C oxidase within cells, which is within the chemical chain reactions that occur. There is complex 4, and that is where that enzyme resides. So there's like 4 complexes basically within the mitochondria, which is a little organelle inside every single one of your cells in the body. And then that complex 4, there's a cytochrome C oxidase enzyme. In the scientific research, they call it a chromophore, just to make it more confusing. But basically what they're talking about is something that accepts the light, and that is that cytochrome C oxidase enzyme. And so once it accepts that light, it does a couple things. One thing it does is it knocks off the free radical nitric oxide off of that, which tends to inhibit the cytochrome C oxidase enzyme. So it's one of only two therapies that are known to remove that toxic free radical, which then in turn increases its activity and helps the cell use oxygen and glucose more efficiently, and which results in the production of more ATP per unit of glucose per unit of oxygen. So it increases the efficiency and the quantity of energy so the body can do whatever it needs to do to maintain health and life.
Okay. So let's talk about the ways we can get red light therapy. So you mentioned the sun, and then I guess really the only other option would be some red light lamps, correct?
Yeah, like right now I've got a chicken lamp on me. It is a full spectrum lamp that's high in near infrared,
Okay.
which is the medicinal range of that. It's, if you look it up, there will be, how do you say this, controversy as to where it begins and ends, but it's pretty clear that it begins around 700 and between 12 and 1500 nanometers, and the research is still effective in the same way. And it's
Okay.
also absorbed in the same way as red light. So yeah, I have a chicken lamp above me and I'm at my standing desk. So I have it kind of aimed at my forehead. And as I work away on the computer, I get some of that. I also use red light therapy devices, but the gold standard is the sun. I mean, when it's a sunny day, I'm outside, I lay down with full skin exposed for, I don't know, 15 minutes each side, and I flip. So that is a great way, and it's free. It's amazing.
Okay. So let's go through some of the benefits of red light therapy, whether we're talking about from the sun or lamps or whatever. What are some of the things we're going to see from that?
Well, one of the things red light therapy does is it acts as an antioxidant. So the thing that really, when you get down to business and understand and look at, what's happening biochemically in the body here, which is so important. I don't like when people make claims like this herb does this or this without like a theory, at least, as to why. So the antioxidant effects of the red light tends to like lower the oxidative stress. And it's the free radicals in the body that tends to damage the mitochondria. And that's what tends to inhibit the energy production. So basically, no matter what the disease, there's going to be increased oxidative stress. So that's the amazing thing. It's like we've been conditioned our whole lives to believe there's like over 30,000 officially classified diseases. There's all these different diseases with all different pathologies. But when you look at the research in my book, Red Light Therapy, Miracle Medicine, you'll see like dozens and dozens of different diseases that are supposedly unrelated, but they all benefit from it. Everything from like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's and dementia, like you shine it directly on your forehead. And if you can get it to reach the brain cells, it has incredible effects on the brain by reducing the toxicity of those free radicals. That improves brain function. Once you have enough energy, then you're good to go. And there was a study at Harvard, interestingly as well, on the brain, a bit different. It's on depression. And this was on students. And with a single treatment, I think it was less than 30 minutes, it like significantly reduced their depression. And the amazing thing was like the peak of the benefits came 1 week after that treatment. So it's like it grows and grows. Once you get the cells on track, they start producing CO2, which is another antioxidant that dilates blood vessels and drives oxygen into cells. Once you get that CO2 production back going and you turn off the lactic acid production, amazing things happen. And it tends to kind of snowball in a beneficial way. You can go downhill fast and with your health, and you can improve very quickly too. And red light therapy seems to be one of the ways to do that. Not just brain function. There have been studies on like macular degeneration. I did a video presentation on that, and it does incredible things. It was like 2 weeks of treatment, 2 to 3 treatments, and it showed significant benefits in visual acuity that lasted like 3 months or more. And now you'll probably have to go back and touch it up, but you can improve and nourish any cells of the body, soft tissue or hard tissue. So brain, eyes, there's been a lot of studies on like dental health and dental benefits of red light. I actually bought a device. It's a mouth guard that you put in, and it emits red light into your gums and your teeth, which has been shown to be very beneficial as well. There have been studies on the thyroid going down the body. The thyroid has shown to also improve function from red light. You just expose it to the neck, that butterfly shaped gland that it's so important. I'll be talking about the thyroid a lot in my upcoming book because it's very important for energy production. It's one of the essential components for efficient energy production. And I think it's a very like rational and evidence-based approach to improving your health, to focus on improving thyroid function. And it does that. But overall, it just like reduces stress, and stress seems to be one of the common things as well. And in addition to like increased oxidative stress, just like stress overall, mentally and physically. And that's one of the things that red light really seems to downregulate. Things like cortisol, adrenaline seems to reduce the activity of these hormones, reduces estrogen, prolactin. All these factors that are elevated during stress seem to come down with exposure to red light. So there's really, I've yet to see any condition or disease or symptom that cannot benefit from red light when I've looked at the scientific research.
Okay. So what is the frequency? So let's just say somebody lives in South Florida. They get sun every day, 20, 30 minutes of sun. Then, I would think they're going to be good. Okay. Versus say somebody like me that I may get 4 to 5 months of, days where I can get sunlight. And then we've got the winter, in which case I may need like a lamp. I mean, is that kind of what you recommend? Does somebody need it every day or most days throughout the whole year? Or what kind of frequency are we talking about here?
Well, that's what I do personally. I'm near Ottawa in Ontario, Canada. So there's a good portion of the year as well without sunlight. And also, I mean, if it's sunny in the winter, I'm not going to go and like lay in it either. So there's a good portion of the year where I can't access the sun either. So I don't know, I would say experiment with it. We don't know for certain, but what we do know from my own experience, it's like the more you need it, you'll notice it. Like the first time I got this infrared heat lamp and I laid underneath it, I was a limo driver at the time, and I was talking to people in the back from like Sweden, and they were saying like that's really common that people use that in these Nordic countries. And so yeah, so I tried it myself, and when I did, I like fell asleep within like 20 minutes. So you can really tell when you need it and how deficient you are in it when you start to use it. So I would say trust yourself. But yeah, I think now that I have kind of topped out my glass, I think every 2 to 3 days or so, I go for a nice dose, and I notice it a lot more. If you do it every day, I think, yeah, it's probably more than you need. So the effects can last a few days at least.
So I want to ask about these red light lamps that you can buy, because you can buy small ones that, are just going to hit a particular body part, or these, full body ones that can get pretty expensive. So I guess talk about those a minute, and maybe what, if people are wanting to go buy, some red light lamps, what kind of things they can look for, and should they get a full body one or what?
Yeah. So there are some doctors who are using these. Dr. Scott Sigman in the US has been using it I wrote an article on COVID patients. He used it on them, and in like one 30-minute treatment, I think it was a 54-year-old African-American man. He was admitted to the hospital with like severe symptoms, which is pneumonia, and he couldn't even walk at the time. And after like a couple treatments, this guy was walking stairs. And so the device that was used there is called the MLS laser. And I looked it up, and it's only 75 watts. So that's pretty low comparatively to some of the devices on the market. And some of the lasers used in studies also are like literally 8 milliwatts, which is 8/1000ths of a watt, which is unbelievably low. And it's been shown to be effective for many things. So the trend in the sale of red light therapy devices seems to be more and more and more wattages, but I don't think you really need anything more than like 600 watts. Like you might be able to find like 1,000-watt one now. I think that's a bit overkill. So what to look for? I would say wavelengths are important. Like we sell red light devices on my site, and we use 620, 670 in the red spectrum, 760, 830, and those have been found in studies to be the most efficiently absorbed. And the difference between that and like an 850 or something is that the treatment time, the amount of time it will take to absorb like a 1 joule dose would be, 30 seconds less or something. So it's not that significant. It will reduce your treatment time to get the same amount of dose. So don't focus so much on wavelength, but I would say focus on wattage. I had some people reach out to me the other day asking about like the helmet devices that are out there. They have that for like regenerating hair.
Right.
And I've seen some good testimonials. It's kind of hard to trust testimonials these days, though. But I suspect it probably works. Like based on the research I've looked at for hair regrowth, it does definitely seem to work. That was one of the first things actually that was discovered about red light, that it helps hair regrow. So I definitely think it works. But those helmet devices, I was looking at the price and I wrote an article on this as well. Like they're literally like 8 milliwatts, the ones I've looked at. So that's just like the other laser devices in some of the studies, which does show to work. I think that's why they chose that wattage. However, the price is like astronomical, considering that's like 8/1000ths of a watt. Like some devices, if you get like an 18-watt one, that's like thousands of times more powerful. And the price is generally lower. Like those helmet devices at 8 milliwatts, I've seen them up to like $1,500. So I think if your goal is to treat hair, the helmet device is great. It has a nice shape, has some benefits, but the price per watt is, it's pretty astronomical. So I would say watch out for that. I would personally just use a regular device. You can get it for a lot less and treat your scalp if you want as well. And you'll have more power and your wallet won't take such a hit.
Sure. Yeah. What about somebody who's just is generally healthy and just, wants to optimize health like myself? Could you get by with a small lamp, or do you, to get the full benefits of red light therapy, would you need one of these, really, full body lamps to kind of expose everything?
Oh, good question. Yeah. So the main benefit with the size differences are that you can treat more parts of the body in the same amount of time. So if you think of like a smaller device, you can give yourself like a 5-joule dose on your face pretty quickly. But if you had a larger one, you'd get that 5-joule dose going all the way down your body. That's really the main benefit, because if you had the smaller one, you'd have to repeat that same amount of time in each of those spots. And really the key is to like reach as many cells as possible to boost the function of every single one. So you can get by with the smaller one. And I've seen amazing things we used to sell 18-watt handhelds. And there was a lady from Toronto. She shined it on her eyes. She had like 5 out of 20 vision. So that's like very low. 20/20 is obviously perfect vision. 5 out of 20 is like a quarter. And so she just did a few treatments and then went to her eye doctor. And one was 15/20 after that, and one was 20/20. Just a couple treatments with this. And that was a handheld 18-watt device. So you can do a lot with these. But like I said, the main difference is that you can treat more of the body with a larger one.
Okay. And do you usually recommend like people use them for what, 15-20 minutes at a time, or?
Yeah, I think like a minimum of 12 minutes per treatment session. I've had somebody reach out to me recently, like he bought the middle size device. It's 180 watts, and he had rosacea on his face. So he had a skin issue, and he wanted to use it while he was at his desk working. So he put it at his desk and kept it on for 8 hours that day. And by the time he left work, that was gone. So 12 minutes minimum, but I would say like up to 2 hours or more if you're enjoying it. I haven't seen any studies showing any negative side effects whatsoever. So it's incredibly safe. So I would say don't be afraid to experiment. There's no perfect dose. It's not worked out like that yet. And I don't know if it ever will be. So that's why I say experiment and decide like how you feel afterwards. Consult yourself, believe how you feel, trust your own body.
So you can't really get too much from a lamp. I mean, obviously you could get too much sun by burning, but if you're just using a lamp, you can't really do it for too long, correct?
Yeah, exactly. There's no ultraviolet emitted. I can't speak for all lights. Yeah. There's no ultraviolet emitted from our lights, and that makes it entirely safe. You'll never get burnt or anything like that.
So I do, a lot of hormone replacement therapy, and we do a lot of sexual wellness at our clinic. And so by doing that, I've come across some people using red light therapy, on their genitalia, men in particular, in raising testosterone levels and stuff like that. What have you come across in regards to that?
Yeah, I saw read one study about that. It like increased the testosterone by like 300% by shining it directly on the testicles. So yeah, it does seem to be able to improve steroidogenesis, and I think maybe through the action of its effects on the thyroid as well. If someone's looking to do that, I would say, since thyroid converts into the hormones, I would access or treat the thyroid, and then also, the testicles directly, probably
Gotcha.
the best approach.
So obviously you wrote a whole book on cancer. You mentioned that briefly at the first. And specifically, how can red light therapy be used for cancer? Because a lot of people, even in mainstream medicine, when they think about sunlight, when people think about sunlight causing cancer, you're saying that red light therapy, which is in a lot of sun, can be used to treat cancer. So talk about red light therapy as it pertains to cancer.
Yeah. So when you really look at cancer, in my book, Cancer, the Metabolic Disease Unraveled, I was just trying to figure out like what's happening in the body inside a cancer patient. And the same enzyme that we just discussed with red light therapy, it turns out that's one of the most sensitive enzymes. And it's also one of the most important because it interacts directly with oxygen. You can think of disease basically as the inability to use oxygen. And cytochrome oxidase seems to be the most vulnerable to damage. So that's why red light therapy can be so effective, because when you look at a cancer cell, almost inevitably across the board, you'll find that the cytochrome C oxidase enzyme is not functioning properly. So if you access that enzyme with some red light, if it happens to be inhibited, then that will restore, once again, efficient use of oxygen and energy production. And it's been studied actually quite a bit more than people might imagine on cancer, especially like all the rage lately is the use of red light with methylene blue. So this is actually like an approved therapy now. And there are different chemical companies, different pharmaceutical companies are actually exploring the use of photodynamic therapy for cancer in studies. And photodynamic therapy would be, you would put like a few drops of methylene blue into some juice, and then you'd sit under a lamp or out in the sun, and that would be your therapy. So that includes the methylene blue, which is the most recent book I've published. And using those together, it seems to be even more powerful and synergistic because they both work on complex 4 on cytochrome C oxidase, but it turns out methylene blue goes beyond that. It can restore function in complex 1, 2, 3, and 4 in the respiratory chain. And just like a real chain in real life, if you break one link, the whole thing falls apart. Well, if any of those are missing enzymes, methylene blue can act like the missing enzyme and complete the process.
So I was going to ask you about methylene blue since you wrote a whole book on it, and we don't have time to get into the whole book, but you kind of gave us a little bit there, but give us a summary on just what is methylene blue, how do we get it, who would benefit from it? Is it just to use in conjunction with red light therapy, or who can benefit from this?
Yeah, so methylene blue was first synthesized in like the mid 1800s by the chemical company BASF, and it was made like for the textile industry to dye fabric. But soon after, within the proceeding decades, it was discovered that it has many other uses in medicine. For example, Dr. Paul Ehrlich, Nobel Prize winner, published a study in the early 1890s, I believe, where he cured, allegedly, 2 malaria patients using methylene blue. So that was actually methylene blue was the very first pharmaceutical drug in history. And still to this day, it's probably the best. So if anyone's out there, like I used to be thinking, hey, all pharmaceuticals are bad. Well, no, that's not true. Methylene blue is one of the good ones. And they have every ability to produce drugs that do act on the metabolism. Another one that mountaineers use is called acetazolamide for mountain sickness. And that's another good pharmaceutical drug. Another one is clonidine, which is like an anti-adrenaline drug. So there's very good ones. A lot of people think I'm anti-pharmaceutical, but I'm not. I just want to transition to metabolic medicine like methylene blue, and a lot of people are taking that into their own hands and doing it. So yeah, methylene blue, very first pharmaceutical drug, was used primarily for malaria, and it's coming back. They kind of got away from it because it dyes your skin and your urine blue, but it's still to this day is turning out to be the greatest anti-malarial drug of all time. In fact, a recent study with rekindled interest in it found it completely cured in 24 to 48 hours malaria patients. So, but that's just the scratching the surface of what it can do. It's also been studied in recent years for like dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, with very beneficial effects. In fact, just an incredibly small dose of like 10 milligrams has been shown to almost completely reversed, like stop the disease in its tracks. And like over 85% of patients in the study. I mean, at what point do we say something cured them? You know, if it's 100%, well, then methylene blue may be the closest thing to a cure for dementia. But it's still, it goes beyond that as well. Like just like red light therapy, every single cell has inhibited metabolism in disease. Methylene blue seems to act to improve that metabolism, and it works synergistically and in very similar ways. So metabolism seems to be the final frontier in medicine, and red light therapy and methylene blue are two ways to really improve that.
Okay. You talk in your book about the number one biggest mistake as it pertains to red light therapy. So what is the mistake people make using red light therapy?
Oh, it's been a while since I've looked at that. I don't know. I don't know what I wrote for that.
Fair enough.
It may be that they try to treat through clothing. That's one big one that people don't do. It's a very efficient blocker of the light.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, that's one of the biggest things I see. And also not eating enough. I think that's one of the biggest problems, probably the biggest that I'm seeing in people. As soon as you hop on one of these like fad diets, it becomes very hard to get enough calories. And a calorie is a unit of energy. And if we're talking metabolism, if what I'm saying is correct, that a lower than optimal metabolism, in other words, deficiency of energy, is the problem, and that is the cause of disease. Well, how are you going to make energy unless you eat adequate energy? So I think people need to uptake or increase their uptake of calories and ensure that they're getting enough of that. So that's another thing I notice.
Okay. All right. Well, very good. So I want to ask you about the new book that you're writing. Before we get into that, anything else you want to throw out there about red light therapy that I didn't ask you?
Not too much, no.
Okay. All right. And so kind of in summary, if it's warm, get out in the sun when you can. Don't burn, but and I tell people this all the time in clinic, get out until just a little bit before you're going to burn. So spend 10 15 minutes and you get so many health benefits from that. And then maybe look at getting an infrared lamp to be used during the winter so you can continue getting those benefits. Correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And something else came to mind. I just read a book by Morley Robbins called Cure Your Fatigue. I don't know if you're familiar with that. And he had an amazing chapter. My favorite chapter from the book. There's a lot of important information in there, but my favorite chapter was talking about vitamin D supplementing. And he made the case that it's not good for you. Same with vitamin C as ascorbic acid. And he laid out the various reasons. But yeah, I found it very compelling. So the idea of supplementing with D is up in the air for me right now. I'm not going to say for certain in either direction, but I would say based on the evidence I've seen, it's very likely that that's not good for you and that there's no substitute for the sun or foods that contain these things. I guess like fish would have a lot. Animal livers would have a lot of the vitamin D in there as well.
Yeah.
And the vitamin A.
Yeah, I haven't read that, but I push vitamin D quite a bit. And yeah, in a perfect world, we could get all that from the sun and naturally, but I check vitamin D levels on everybody and almost everybody is really, really low. And so I feel it's important to get the vitamin D levels up and get them up fairly quickly. And then once you get them up, if you can maintain them by maybe the more natural approaches, I think that's great. But I've seen so many health benefits from kind of higher end vitamin D levels as it pertains to, the immune system and COVID and, things like that, that I think it's important to get up. And then the other thing I would say to that is just based on people's lifestyles, they get up, they go to work, they're under fluorescent light all day, especially in the wintertime. It's dark by the time they come home and they just don't, because of our lifestyles, they don't have a way to get out in the sun and get that vitamin D or enough sunlight to raise the vitamin D levels as much as they need to. So
well said. And you raise a good point. Those fluorescent tube lights that are often in offices, they contain almost no red end of the spectrum, and they could, but they made them very blue. And when you look at like the effects of blue, it tends to have the exact opposite effects of red light. So if you're one of those people under those lights, under the fluorescent lights all day, well, I guess first optimize your home environment by changing them. Incandescent has a solid amount of red, even though they're kind of banned in some places. But LEDs with like a 2200 Kelvin is pretty high in red. So optimize your home environment. And then if you are in one of those environments at work and you can't change it, well, make sure you get some exposure to either the sun or, red light after work at least.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. So talk about kind of your next project. So you're working on a book specifically about PUFAs. My guests I'm sure have heard me talk a little bit about PUFAs before. So talk about what got you interested in that and why you want to write a whole book about that.
Yeah, so now that I've documented like 3 therapies that seem to act on the metabolism very well, the third one, well, red light therapy, methylene blue, and then the third was balneotherapy, which is like bathing in mineral-rich carbonated water, which like since the beginning of modern medicine has been the primary treatment modality. Up until like World War II, they had hundreds of what they called water cure treatment centers in the US, which I was so surprised to hear, because even people who are like well-researched may be surprised to hear that as well. It's like, how did I not know that? It's so incredible. So those are the 3 therapies that I looked at. And then after that, I was like, okay, I got to get into food. Obviously, food's important. It's such a difficult, people are so divided in it. And I want to give people a different approach. So I had to take a different strategy towards it. And this is why I'm focusing on PUFAs, dietary fats, because it becomes very clear that the more unsaturated a fat is, the more toxic. It's like a free radical cocktail. I guess the way I like to talk about this right now is like in the 1800s, what we know as vegetable oil, the stuff that has like a whole grocery store aisle dedicated to it, that liquid corn and soybean and seed and nut oils, those didn't exist. They existed in very limited quantities, but they were stored in the shed, and they were used to like lubricate machines in the Industrial Revolution, and they were used as like a base for paint because it hardened so thoroughly when you painted on wood. And it was also used as lamp fuel. And then all of a sudden, like 1911 came and they introduced Crisco vegetable oil. They basically figured out a way to turn like these inedible machine lubricant into food. So basically people are eating lamp fuel, and that's when all the major chronic diseases began. So it's like cancer, diabetes, heart disease, Alzheimer's, whatever you want to call it, it doesn't matter. Like for the most part, it's poisoning from eating lamp fuel. It's kind of funny if you think about it, but it's sad at the same time. But what we do need is we need information. People need to understand this. And when you look at the evidence, it's pretty clear. It's like one of the most potent thyroid inhibitors that exists. And I've got a study for showing 5 different ways that it inhibits thyroid. 1, the manufacture in the thyroid gland. PUFA inhibits the transport of thyroid, the T4, through the bloodstream. It inhibits the conversion of T4 to T3 in the liver. It inhibits the uptake of T3 into cells, and it inhibits the use of that T3 once it's in the cells. So it's like one of the most potent thyroid inhibitors in all of nature. And people are consuming like up to 80 grams per day, I think, on average in the US right now.
Yeah.
And it is directly related to all the chronic degenerative diseases. So it's a very exciting book, and it's more profound than any other book I've read. So I'm really excited to get this information out there.
Cool. Yeah, no, we look forward to that. Definitely. It's a problem. And I tell patients all the time, man, if you've got that stuff in the cabinet, throw it in the trash. It's poison. As far as the cooking oils and stuff. And obviously those things are in processed foods, and they're everywhere. But very, very bad for you. Well, very nice. So you've got a website, which I really encourage people to go look on, endalldisease.com. And you've got all kind of articles about different things, about some just natural approaches to things. And anyway, I was just looking at it before we got on. Great website. So I'd encourage people to get on there, endalldisease.com. All your books are on there, all that. So as we wrap up, I always ask my guests if they could give us one health tip that could make us healthier today. What would you say to that?
I would say live hard. I just got a set of kettlebells myself, and I started doing kettlebell training, and it's amazing what that's done for me. Like most people don't like to lift heavy weights, but if you're willing to, you get rewarded for it. In life, you get out what you put in. So it's that's what I would say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, great advice. So, all right. Well, Mark Sloan, appreciate your time today and expertise on these topics. And again, everybody check out his website, endalldisease.com. And thank you to everybody listening. And we will talk to you next time.
All right. Thanks, Craig. It's been a pleasure.